let's get started because there is a lot for us to get through today. So nice to see everyone online. My name is Jess Strathdy and I'm an account executive here at Antares Solutions, and I work in the modern work team. Prior to my time here at Antares, I was a digital transformation lead and I have been a service owner for the M365 space for a global organization. So I am very familiar with some of the challenges that often arise, particularly from leadership and the pressure to keep up to date with what's happening in the space of AI and getting started with Copilot. So that's why I thought it'd be really valuable to start with a session, helping people understand, where you actually get started, because it can be quite overwhelming to actually unpack. And when you see what other people are doing, you might feel like you're behind, but I can assure you there's lots of people in all different stages of their AI journey at the moment, and we work with a lot of clients. So hopefully with this session, we can give you some practical steps in terms of how to get started or what the next, way forward might be for your organization. Based on my observations and what I see with a lot of clients that we work with, that Copilot pilots tend to fail because people do rush into it and they see it as a bit of that hype. And as I mentioned, feeling the pressure to keep up with what other people are doing. They're often, giving licenses to employees without having much structure around it. And then it becomes one of those tools that just sits on the side of a staff's day-to-day operations, and they might use it more for question and answer rather than really embedding it into their day-to-day workflow, which is something that you want to avoid. With this webinar, we've decided to do a 3-part series really to take you through a journey of how you can start with a Copilot pilot and then proceed to what do you do after you've completed that pilot, and how do you scale that into a full implementation across your business and then beyond that. So when you hear about, deeper data models and Microsoft Foundry AI, there's a lot to unpack there, and that's quite technical. So that's going to be in future sessions. So hopefully you join us along the whole journey here and get a lot of insights from our team. So today's agenda, what we'll cover is the importance of a Copilot pilot and really what you might need to focus on if you're in a leadership role, or what you can pitch to your leadership if you're considering starting a pilot. Then I've put together a framework that I think is quite valuable to help you define what use cases are going to actually be relevant and worthwhile investing your time in. And then we talk about how to measure the value of the Copilot pilot and demonstrate return on investment. And then we've got a really diverse cohort of attendees today from organizations, of all different shapes and sizes and industries as well. So I've put together a few examples of practical use cases of what a pilot might look like across some different industries. And then, of course, I'm more than happy to talk to anyone offline if you'd like a deeper understanding of where you could apply this in your organization. And then we'll jump into questions and answers at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please pop it in the chat and we'll come to it at the end. Hopefully we can answer as many questions as we can, but if not, we can send a follow-up email afterwards and clarify those questions for you. Okay, I want to get started with a bit of an interactive question, and you should shortly see this pop up on your screen, which is going to be a word cloud. And I want to get an understanding of how everyone feels about AI today, particularly in the context of, your operations, how you're using it in your business, or if you're completely afraid of it, and, you're really hesitant to get started. So this helps us, shape future sessions or maybe have tailored conversations with individuals. So if you see that on your screen now, just pop in, 1-2 words about how you feel in terms of AI today. And then hopefully we can start to see some responses up there. Yeah, confused is one that I see a lot. There's a lot, it's overwhelming, it changes so rapidly as well. So it's really hard to keep on top of. There's some really positive ones there as well. Energized, beneficial, and yes, higher expectations is also something that I see a lot. The expectation that Copilot can do everything or it does nothing. I'll give you all a couple of moments just to pop in some responses. Skeptical. Intrigued. Okay, great. Well, there wasn't anything overly alarming there. I've seen people say they think AI is going to take over the world, so I'm glad none of you are on that page. Yeah, so the first section we're going to go through is what is the strategic purpose behind starting a Copilot pilot? And this is really important if you are an IT leader or a generic business leader that's looking at taking the next steps with AI, or if you're someone that's trying to pitch this opportunity to your leadership team to, consider investing in Copilot and starting a pilot. A pilot is really important because it's going to act as a diagnostic tool and it shouldn't be seen as a trial. A lot of people have this mindset that it's kind of a pass or failure on a product and therefore you won't use it. But AI is not going anywhere. It's embedded in everything that we see today. And so a pilot is really going to be that tool that will help you uncover where your priorities are as an organization. So you might find that there's operational workflows that are redundant if you start looking into this process, and then you can just get rid of them altogether, or you might need to enhance them, whether it be with Copilot or in a different way. You could probably identify, a lot of organizations do identify gaps in data and where there's significant data governance opportunities that need to be focused on before you can embed AI across the whole organization. And it's also a really good opportunity to identify which teams in your organization are thinking innovatively, they have better ways of doing things, and giving them a platform to be involved and get creative with what they're doing. So it should be seen as a tool that will give your organization clarity and not just a hype around, using AI and solving every business problem today. So a pilot really helps by preventing instances where you might just give licenses to Copilot to everyone, and then you start seeing AI embedded into processes that already fail or are already being done in an inefficient manner. And there's a common saying, the output is only as good as the quality of the information that's, the data that's being fed into that. So if you start with a pilot, you're avoiding that kind of ongoing, repetitive, creation of more problems than really a way forward. It will help prevent uncontrollable risk. So a lot of organizations, if they just roll out licenses broadly, they find that there's overshared or oversprawled of information that should be not accessible. So a pilot can control that and can help you identify, as we said before, the areas that you need to focus on cleaning up prior to rolling it out broadly across the business. And then it also helps avoid, adopting without having any real reason why you're doing it or what the business value is. And then, if you are questioned from a leadership perspective of what is the return on investment for this really expensive product, you don't necessarily have any metrics to provide if you haven't done a structured pilot and been able to measure it. And what it does support is it will really help you identify where automation can be embedded across your workflows and create a really good culture of champions across your business. As we said, people that want to be involved will step up in a pilot phase and typically get involved. And then it creates repeatable models that for success where you can roll it out more broadly across your organization. So you're looking for patterns that are able to be scaled. So I'll go through the framework, and this is going to give you practical steps, and you can, take some of them or apply all of them if you want to. That will really help you identify where you should focus your efforts on for a Copilot pilot. So there's an 8-step framework that I like to work with, and this is, you should get your IT committee together or whoever's thinking about leading this and follow these steps, but look beyond, the typical teams that are always involved in this. So step outside of the IT team, step away from just the leadership perspective of what they think needs to be done rather than what happens on the ground, and then go through these steps, which I'll take you through in detail in a moment. But essentially, you start with looking for recurring work that's happening daily, monthly, weekly. Map those workflows, interview the people that are getting involved in the detail there, observe where their frictions are, and then start translating that into pain points and prompts that could be, enhanced through AI and Copilot. So if we get started with step 1 and 2, a lot of people go into a Copilot pilot thinking about a solution. So there's always instances I've seen where leadership say, I want to do this really cool thing with a new piece of technology, but it's not actually a process that the business actually undertakes today. And they're thinking 5 steps ahead instead of looking at those really redundant kind of annoying processes that people deal with day to day. And those exist everywhere. There's a lot of reoccurring tasks. And so it's really important to step away from the solution and start unpacking problems. So things that happen every day, they require staff looking around for information and then speaking, as I said, to the people who are on the ground doing the work for you. So your frontline workers, get them in a room, site staff, operational staffs, teachers, even if you're from an education organization, and see what they do day to day. Surfacing friction is the best way to find a way to improve your workflow. So we're asking people what takes you the most time each day. And I think people, if they're given a safe opportunity to talk about this, they will be really forthcoming with some of the processes that they've probably thought about for a long time that could be improved. So where are you often switching tabs and copying, pasting things from one document to another? Is there a way in which they're drafting information and sending it for review and then redrafting again? Can that be improved? So these are the types of questions and workflows you should be kind of interrogating and talking to your staff about, and that will identify those really high value workflows to look into further. So step 5 is mapping each of those workflows that you've collected through that kind of interview process and mapping it against these common prompts that we see in the use of Copilot. So summarize this for me, or create a new document, a new report, or a new plan. Extracting information and analyzing things from a detailed report or from an Excel file, and opportunities to transform and rewrite and restructure, opportunities for refining, and then where can you make decisions? So where can AI decide based on the data that it's observing? So these are the 5 kind of common, or 6 common prompts that we see. And then what's also really important in a pilot is actually assessing all of the different opportunities you've identified and quickly picking which ones are going to be able to be moved forward and killing the ones that are probably best left for later. So there's a 5 fit criteria that you can apply, and it's looking across the frequency. So is this weekly, daily, or if it's something that just happens, quarterly, maybe it's not as much of a priority for you. Is it high effort and high volume for your users? So are they doing a lot of the same task? And is automating it or adding Copilot going to be an additional step, or is it going to be quite valuable for them? Data being accessible is a really big one. A lot of people have processes or data in their head or scrambled all over the place, but if it's not already in a kind of structured way that you can leverage AI over the top of, it's not going to be very valuable in a pilot or in the future. So you shouldn't consider that right now. Can you actually measure the time it took people to do it today? I know people are notorious for saying, this takes me so long to do. It's really frustrating. But if you ask them to actually put a metric against how long that happens and they're not able to do it, then I wouldn't consider that worthy of progressing at this time. And then, is it an owned workflow? Does this have a team behind it? Is there someone that's going to actually take the pilot forward and run with it and kind of lead that for themselves? So that's a good criteria to decide, okay, this is a really good idea, but it's not worthwhile taking forward into a pilot. And then the next steps is prioritizing and then baselining. So it's really important to know how long tasks take your staff today, and if you can gather information by looking at kind of system logs or feedback from people prior, and then being able to do the same at the end. And then, sorry, I just clicked the button. And then, you need to be able to report on the ROI back to your executive team. So if there's no baseline before you start your pilot, there's definitely not going to be a story that you'll be able to tell at the end. So that's really important. And we'll get into how to measure the value and what you should actually be looking for across those different categories. So value isn't just, Copilot usage or how many interactions is someone having with a chat, because that could be a lot of someone going back and forth, asking questions all day and just getting general knowledge. It should really be defined by the instances that can, provide faster decision-making opportunities for the business, give you a higher quality output. So, a report that needs less reviews internally or less reworks. To be able to demonstrate that it's a better output, and then no copying and pasting or examples where you might find a lot of errors in a report. If that is able to be replaced by this process because there's quality control checks embedded into that, that's a good outcome. And then cost avoidance is also really important as well. A lot of people think that it's about, cutting cost and maybe needing less staff, but it's also about the cost avoidance of things that might go wrong in the future, or where you might need to expand a team. You can stay with what you have today, but you're able to operate more efficiently. So cost avoidance is also really important for defining value with a business. So as I mentioned before, there is some tangible ways to track your ROI. So you can look at system logs, depending on which operational systems you're working with. You can look within Copilot as well and how people are using it. But it's also really important to keep talking to the people that you started speaking to at the start of the pilot. So the same people that you collected these ideas from and understood pain points, continue to check in with them throughout this whole pilot and ask them if they're seeing an improvement in day-to-day. Can it be, do you need to pivot and change the approach because you've learned something else throughout the process? So don't only speak to people at the start, keep talking to them frequently throughout and then beyond the pilot as well. And it's really useful to build a kind of an AI value dashboard if you're in a position to do something like that in Power BI, or, you might just be doing a report up to your leadership each week or month that you're conducting this pilot. But tracking and demonstrating the value is really important. So here's an example of a before and after workflow that can demonstrate, some really high quality improvement in terms of time it's taken. So a status reporting workflow, a lot of projects require people to put together every single week, the status report of where things are at. You need contributions from all different project team members. The coordinator is chasing them. They're getting it in different formats, different levels of detail and things like that, and trying to compile it into one report. With Copilot, what it can do is, one example would be enabling it to scan across the emails and the project team chats, any shared documents that were referenced throughout that week, and compiling all that information together and inputting it into maybe a predefined report that that you want to follow. And that prevents that person from having to kind of interpret other people's reports and restructure it, and also chasing and trying to get that information. If Copilot is enabled across all of the Teams meetings and the emails, it's pretty good at being able to compile that story itself. Okay. So practical use case examples, these are, industry specific, but also you could look at it from a different lens and think about a process that might be relevant to your business that's similar to, say, what I present for an education example. And, they're quite generic in terms of you will be able to apply them across the board. So one example for an education sector where Copilot could add a lot of value is in relation to summarizing reports to parents about a student's, performance or behavior over time. And so I believe teachers spend a lot of time outside of classroom hours writing reports and preparing updates, and maybe that correspondence to a teacher. So if Copilot was enabled through the pilot, you would be able to summarize from different sources, the student's progress. Maybe it's tracking their attendance, lesson notes that have been pulled together, and then drafting a personalized email to that parent. And you can even leverage Copilot to suggest intervention opportunities. So an estimated 2 hours per week for a teacher that's outside of their business hours that they're doing this kind of compiling and correspondence with a parent. For a construction and infrastructure sector, there's a lot of repetitiveness in terms of compiling site diaries. So site managers probably have to spend hours pulling together different bits of information that they might receive over Teams or text and through photos that come through an email in not very structured format. So enabling Copilot across those data sources in terms of scanning the emails and chats, you'd be able to compile all of that evidence that's submitted over a period of time into your safety report that you might have already predefined. And that could do an up to 70% administrative time saved for a site manager, enabling them to focus on, risk and things like that. For a local government example, so councils, typically receive thousands of online submissions and phone calls of complaints and different, opportunities from the community to enhance. So if you pulled all that data together and overlaid M365 Copilot, you'd be able to actually really quickly analyze and identify, what are the common problems, maybe prioritize it based on location and risk involved, and then help drive a faster response to the community in terms of what the council and local government's looking at doing, and really making data-driven decisions. Healthcare and community services. So a common use case there is when clinicians and caseworkers are spending a lot of time in terms of compiling their notes from the day and all the different patients that they've seen and preparing a shift handover or flagging some risks. So similar to the other ones, is linking all of those different case notes and sources together, and then helping the clinician summarize that into the right type of notes in the right format to hand over to the next shift. And that could save a lot of administrative time and giving them more opportunity to focus on the quality of their care. For the legal sector, I think a really good opportunity to enhance, a workflow is contract review, or even a small business. If you don't have a particular legal team, you could set up a pilot around reviewing your contracts, and you could build in your company's playbook or standard positions that you typically accept, and then apply that over the top of the contract and ask Copilot to flag, clauses that are outside of that or that might have really high risk and things that you might want to look at in more detail. So it doesn't take away, you casting your eyes over it, but it really brings your attention to the areas that might be of most interest to you. So they're just some examples across different industries. Obviously, the list is really extensive. So I've put together a prompt that you could take away today, and we will send out this presentation after. But you could, after this call, just take this prompt, chuck it into Copilot chat for web if you have that, or whatever AI tool you might have enabled in your business, and just use Copilot to help you unpack some common and uncommon ways that you might be able to use Copilot in your day-to-day. So be very specific, tell it what your role title is, what industry you're working in, and maybe provide examples of some things that you do every single day that you might find really frustrating. And you might be surprised, particularly with the uncommon ways that you could use Copilot and what response you'll get there. And that could give you a really good place to start just for your own personal productivity after this call. Okay, I'll jump over to questions, and my colleague Mark, who is a senior consultant in the Modern Work team, is also available to help answer any hairy technical questions or, things that I might not be able to help with. So do we have any questions at this time, Trudy? And this is a really base level webinar, so feel free to ask questions, that you might be too nervous to ask in other forums, or, when you see people demonstrating really well advanced AI use cases and you might feel like you're far behind, but this is a safe space to ask those kind of unknown questions, if there is any. Okay, I see one question. So how can you trust the output and how can you guarantee integrity? Mark, I might get you to also jump on for this one, but I think that is a very valid point, and also why it's really important to do a pilot, because unless you know that the data that you're inputting or how you've configured your Copilot to operate, or the agent that you've created is linked to reliable sources, it is quite risky in terms of the information that could be surfaced, particularly if internally you don't have clean data or you haven't updated the way in which it's presented in quite some time. So, Mark, do you have any advice on managing that and controlling that if you are looking at a pilot?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one key element of as you mentioned, trusting the output is really, as part of the pilot, ensuring that your pilot users are aware that they need to be hesitant. Hesitant's maybe not the right word, but at least be aware that there are some opportunities for Copilot to give you data that may not be incorrect. The way you guarantee integrity, or at least very much look at fixing the integrity of your data, is making sure that your data, as Jess mentioned, is as clean as possible up front. So if we're looking at, say, a great example is a policy agent within a Copilot. Fairly simple. It looks at all of your internal policies. It outputs data based on those policies that people are asking questions to. One issue that could arise, as an example, is if there are 2 credit card policies in the system. One of them is from 5 years ago that says your credit card limit is 1,000. The next one says it's 200. If you're asking what my credit card limit as a standard employee is, Copilot, if it's finding 2 different documents, is going to pick one of those to utilize. If we make sure the data is clean, we only have the most recent version of a document. We make sure that the content within that is kept up to date. So we put lifecycle controls in place, governance for this information. So it's not a big free for all with several different versions of several different documents. Then we're going to only get the data that we need, because we pointed that particular Copilot agent at a very specific use case. Rather than having it open at all data, we're saying this is only looking at policies, so we know where it's looking, so we know what to clean up. We know that it's clean, and we're maintaining that cleanliness throughout the life cycle of the documents. So therefore, the integrity is going to be much better because we know what data it's looking at. And also, of course, we're going to have the caveats that all AI tools still have, is that you need to double check the answers.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good use case as well, for a pilot, because you will surface some issues maybe in your internal documentation, such as policies, that you need to really quickly remediate. But it's lucky that, it's only come up to 5 or 10 users rather than your entire organization. So finding issues like that, I wouldn't see as a problem. I think it's a good way, as we said at the start, to uncover where you need to do further work that probably isn't even related to AI. So, your compliance and legal team need to update the policies. That's a project for them to now pick up and take on before you embed that policy agent across your entire organization. Another question, so in relation to EAs and accessing Outlook, I believe at the moment, Copilot, if you are accessing someone else's Outlook environment or their calendar, you're not able to apply your Copilot license to their instance. But I do know that it is on the roadmap from a Microsoft perspective to kind of build out that use case and persona for the EAs to be able to do that, but it's not current capability within the Copilot in terms of, summarizing other people's inboxes or their calendars at this time. So it's licensed to your account and your name as an individual.
I have just posted in the chat an article for Microsoft support for this exact use case. Not sure. I think there are some workarounds suggested in there as well. So it might be worth having a look at shared mailboxes and delegated mailboxes. Obviously with that testing, I did find that article, so it might be worth having a look at to see if there are any alternatives you can use to get that summary. I don't think it's quite as easy as clicking the mailbox and hitting summary, but there might be some workarounds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another question, Mark, for you, and maybe based on your experience with Copilot pilots, is how do you capture and report on data breaches or accidental sharing that comes out through a Copilot enablement?
Yeah, so I think that there is a lot of great governance tools within the Copilot stack to be able to understand exactly what people are sending or reporting through Copilot. Ideally, you're using your Microsoft Purview, sensitivity labels, DLP policies, classifications to ensure that we are stopping Copilot from looking at anything that would be considered sensitive. The flip side of that is if there is a data breach and something is shown to somebody that has access to that, it's very hard to find that Copilot find those issues. And that comes back to that initial cleanup that we suggest in making sure that you know that the right permissions are applied to the right areas within your environment. So only the right data is coming through. If you have sensitive documents in a very specific site, you would make sure that that site is excluded across the board from any Copilot access, so it isn't pushing anything out. The difference there being, yeah, if somebody has access to a document, Copilot won't know that it's accidentally sharing that information. So you would either rely on your users reporting anything that is incorrect. There are some as I mentioned, some governance tools in the background for Microsoft that they can absolutely see what kind of answers you're getting and what the Copilot is giving out to users, but that would have to be a reactive review of the answers as opposed to something more proactive to stop.
Yeah. And in terms of setting up your pilot, that can be part of the criteria, what levels of risk you're willing to accept before moving forward. Or if you uncover that there is data that is being shared and you've only just started that pilot, do you immediately put it to a halt and then look at that problem and how do you fix that as the organization?
There's a question there around ChatGPT being the most well-known and being used. Most of our customers that are using Copilot are ensuring that ChatGPT is turned off. So we obviously understand the risks, but one key risk is around it. ChatGPT will have the data that you put into it, and will be able to make decisions based on that data, and that data becomes a lot more open to the large language model and whatnot around Copilot. Pardon me, around ChatGPT. Knowing within Copilot, all of your data stays within your Microsoft tenancy, so nothing is leaving your tenancy. It's very much self-contained, so you don't have that risk of pushing something out into the ether. Microsoft have got a lot of security controls around keeping everything inside your tenancy when using Copilot. So rather than explaining to all staff to use Copilot, we would definitely explain why we want them to use Copilot, but we would also enforce that through policy and through limitation of any external AI tools, because the risk is potentially quite great.
Yeah. And it's really important to identify your preferred organization tool, Copilot or whatever it might be, and then putting in those preventative measures so you can actually redirect. If someone types in ChatGPT or any type of AI tool, you can put a redirect that it directly points them to your preferred organization's tool, and you can add some messaging around that. Microsoft have enabled, and I think they have some guides on how to do that available as well. But staff, we find that people don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to use the wrong tool. They just need to know what you approve, how to use it, and how they can access it. And then you'll find that over time, people naturally will gravitate towards doing the right thing and they're not intentionally trying to be malicious in that sense.
I see, to your point, Craig, around 30% of end users using ChatGPT is the estimate alongside Copilot. Completely agree with that concept. So we have at Antares, and to that point, there are other AI tools out there. We internally at Antares use our Qbot tool. So I have access to that to ask some more broader questions, things like if I'm doing PowerShell scripting or anything around code that I find that something like that is key. Putting something like that in place that's a little bit more focused on your organization and again contained within your tenancy is a much safer approach than using ChatGPT. So having an alternative alongside Copilot or a Copilot agent can do the same thing, that you have a focused approach for any use cases that your users have to move them off ChatGPT. And certainly there are instances where you are asking quite generic questions and there's not that risk of pushing your data out, but it's also not worth the risk that the even 1% chance that something gets out that shouldn't be out there, the risk is still too great.
Yeah. What about for you, Mark? Notebook LM.
So we haven't done much with Notebook LM. We're obviously very focused on the Microsoft stack, so I'm not quite sure how the Google Notebook LMs or any of the other language models work within Copilot. I know you do have the ability to access different models through Copilot, so we need to get one of the more technical guys if you're looking at using external language models out there. So I wouldn't say that it isn't something you can integrate. But it's not something we've done in the past.
A question, can I create custom Copilot agents or plugins for repetitive company-specific workflows? And the answer is definitely you can, and that is the intention of a Copilot pilot initially. It depends on the licensing that you do have access to and also your internal capability in terms of creating an agent and supporting an agent over time. So you'd have to have the right licenses in place and resources or outsource that to teams such as Antares to help support you in building and implementing those agents. Lots of questions. So another one is, if our sales team are putting their notes into the sales CRM, can Copilot access this data in order to produce client summary reports? Mark, do you want to answer about more broadly than just Dynamics, I guess, if third-party integrations as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously Dynamics being on the Microsoft stack is the key CRM that integrates with Copilot and allows you to pull that data in, but you can absolutely integrate any other third-party system with Copilot. Obviously that's something that you would take under advisement when doing a pilot within your organization and understand the very specific requirements that you have around what you would pull out, what you don't want to pull out, ensuring that the permissions are being maintained throughout that integration. So there would be some key questions and some key rules and guidelines that we need to put in place. But most definitely it is something that is available if your CRM has any sort of integration.
Yeah, and that is a really good use case for something to pilot, testing that integration and the stability there, and what kind of summaries you can extract and seeing if it's worthwhile building out that further. From Jen, so what are the limitations with Copilot Chat? And I believe this is in relation to the free version that most organizations have access to. So it's just the web version. So you can upload documents. I don't know specifically, Mark, if there's a limitation on how many documents you can reference per prompt? I think it's 5 or...
Yeah, off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
We're lucky enough to have licenses, so we don't come across the limitations in a real life scenario. There are some I'm trying to find some documentation now around the limitations, Microsoft documentation. So maybe we can get that out after the session.
Yeah. Yes. But they do have some, limitations, obviously prompting you to move into the paid version, which can access your internal data and things like emails and web chats, Teams chats as well. Okay, I'll just move to the next slide. So another question for the group, just to round things out, is get a sense of how do you feel about a Copilot pilot or taking the next step after this session. And so another question will come onto the screen. Depending on how you respond, we might be in touch with you from Antares just to touch base, have a conversation and see if there's any opportunity for us to support you in taking the next steps. But there's always the next webinar where we'll talk more about how you scale beyond the pilot and then stepping into the more data environment. So if you could just respond. Yeah, a lot of people still processing the information. It's a lot to unpack and definitely difficult for us to cover everything in a short session, but we will send out the slides and the recording, and then we can, have further tailored conversations with anyone that's interested in terms of your organization, your industry, and where there might be value for you after this call. And those who have said they're very confident, I might have to invite you to present at the next session so you can tell us what you're doing and how you're using it in your organization. Okay, great. So that's all we have today for this webinar. You can get in touch with me. My email's on there, my phone number, or scan the QR code that will link to the Antares website, and you can get all of our information. We have a few case studies up on the website of organizations that we are working with and some of the AI that they have been working on, and they're really amazing use cases that we've seen, but a more tailored conversation where we can dive into your operations and your workflows is probably the most beneficial if you are feeling overwhelmed or unsure at this time. But thanks everyone, really appreciate your time, and good luck with the next steps of your Copilot journey.